filming from Rachel's Cafe in beautiful Bloomington, Indiana. Today we talk about Eindhoven Bridge, published by Victory Point Games. This is the same game in the Market Garden series by Paul Koenig. It is a series that covers separate battles of Operation Market Garden. Each game covers the battle for a single bridge. In the previous game, we had the battle for the Arnhem Bridge. Now we have a game that covers Eindhoven, as the title tells us. So the situation is known. We are in Market Garden, we are in World War II, the Allied attempt in Europe to seize the bridges of Holland. We have there are movies and books that talk about this, and here we have the representation of the battles of this operation that are represented at the introductory level, meaning that this definitely is a game that has been designed to also work as an introduction to wargaming. If you're teaching wargaming to yourself, or if you want to show some basic concepts of wargaming to one of your friends, there's a game that would work in that setting, because the general rules of the system are very, very simple. Each game covers a different bridge and comes with exclusive rules, but again, really not many, and extremely simple rules, very easy to play. This is also a game that may work well in solitaire mode, especially because there is no hidden information and no other things of that sort, and it is based on a cheat pool mechanic that of course adds a little bit of unpredictability. Actually, a lot of unpredictability in this game, as I will explain when we'll see the game in detail. In any case, this is the general idea. Let me show the game and then we can talk about my general impressions about the game. This is the map for the game, printed on cardstock, as it is typical of Victory Point games. It seems to be coated with something. It just looks and feels a little more pleasant than the average Victory Point game map. And also the counters are not the thick counters that you see in recent Victory Point games, but they are not the super thick counters that we had in the past. They are clean cut, also they look like coated, a little shinier than usual. So component wise, this game is not of the high quality of recent games such as in Magnificent style, but it seems above the average of the old style Victory Point games. I think this is the missing link between the old games and the new ones. In any case, the components are pretty good for a DTP publication. Here you see the area of the conflict with the city of Eindhoven. That is going to be the center of the conflict, or at least this is what the ally player hopes for. The ally player will enter units from here or from here. These units will try to move to Eindhoven as soon as possible and to take control of the axes that you see here, the ones bordered in red, and there are X's with a star here representing the key bridges of Eindhoven, and those X's are even more worthy in terms of victory points. And points will be assigned, in fact, based on occupation of victory point hexes and on elimination of enemy units. This is a cheat pool game, so units will be activated by formation. Here I have the three initial allied formations in three different stacks. As you can see, I use magnetic counters because it is convenient. Even when I have the space to store the game, I kind of just like it. It keeps the stacks neat. They can still fall, but it's kind of like easy to retrieve them. I just like having these clean and easy to organize stacks. In any case, you pull the cheat for one of the formations and all the units in that stack can activate. I'm not going to go through all of the rules here because I already make a video about another game in the series in which I explain all the rules of the series. Just to give you a general idea, you activate your units, and the activated units of the activated formation can move up to their full movement allowance, or they can fire against an adjacent enemy with their full firepower, or they can move and fire, or fire and move using half of the movement allowance and half of their firepower. There's also another type of attack, which is close combat, that happens when you actually enter the X containing an enemy unit, it works pretty much like regular fire, but terrain is not taken into account. The defender gets to fire before the attacker does, so there is an extra risk, but if the attacker is still there when it is the time for the attacker to attack, and the attack is successful, then the defender is forced to retreat. That is pretty much the advantage of close combat, that it forces the opponent to retreat, whereas regular combat does not. And since here the game is really about control of terrain, of course, it may be pretty important to be able to push the opponent back. However, here you have a limit in stacking of 2 units per hex, both sides. That means that if there are 2 enemy units in a stack, you cannot attack in close combat because you cannot have 3 units in the same hex. First, you need to eliminate a unit from that stack and then hope that you're able to launch close combat before the opponent puts another unit on top of that one, preventing you from using close combat against that hex. How does the game play here? Let me show you the general gameplay. Again, here, as I said, the units of the LA player start from these 2 axes here. They have 3 formations at the beginning. There aren't too many German units on the board at the beginning of the game. There's this formation here that enters the game in turn 1, reinforcing formation in turn 2, and it enters from here too, and then another formation in turn 5 enters from here. So by turn 5, the board is going to have a considerable amount of Axis units on it. Luckily enough, the Allied also receive reinforcements, and receive very good reinforcements with a firepower of 7, which is excellent. Problem is that these units enter the game through paratroop landing, and that is dangerous. That means that before those units can be brought in the game, you need to roll on the paratroop landing table that you see up there, and depending on the result, the unit may arrive intact, or after suffering 1 hit or 2 hits, or simply never arrives. That table simulates the damage that the unit may take during the landing and the fight immediately consequent to the landing. So here we have an initial push from the Allies, and that push is going to be slowed down by the arrival of the reinforcements, and then we're going to have a second push, which well, the intensity of the second push, of course, is a little hard to predict because of that. The German player will want to slow down the Allies as much as possible. The game only lasts 10 turns, 2 of which are night turns, during which there's no combat, only the Axis player can move. And to slow down the Allied player, of course, terrain is pretty important. The German player can try to put a strong defense here, taking advantage of terrain, and that may or may not work. And then very important are these bottlenecks here, created by these 2 bridges, because the rivers are impassable. There's no combats that can happen across a river. So if you place 2 units here in a stack, the Allied player can attack those only from 1 hex, and that of course will slow down the LA player. This is a cheat pool game, so actually the order in which units activate is unpredictable, and this can be pretty important because depending on that, the LA player may be able indeed to move across that bridge relatively fast, and or that one, and the LA player may also be able again to attack in such an order that allows the LA player to pretty much attack twice before the units in that stack or that formation can react, and that can help a lot in creating a breakthrough. Once the Allies start flowing in good numbers across these 2 bridges, then the German player does not have much left to do but to retreat here and to put together a static defense here in the city, taking advantage of terrain and just using attrition. Also, there are no zones of control in this game, which is pretty important. Again, it forces the players to take that into account because the German player has to take into account the fact that the Allies units can be pretty sneaky. So they need to be stopped at the bottlenecks, or they need to be surrounded by large lines of enemies. And since that will not always be possible, then you simply have to stop them right at the gates of the city, which is pretty much where you know they're going. Otherwise, they're easily going to move around your units. This is a game that can work pretty well as an introduction, I believe, just because of the simplicity, how easy it is to pick up, to set up. It can be played in around an hour or a little bit more, so all the good things that you have in good introductory war games. As a game per se, sometimes it feels a little limited just because of the way in which terrain dictates the overall action, and also because of the way in which the rules also kind of like bring a certain type of action to the fore more than others. The rules really seem to encourage gameplay to go towards a specific direction. You can experiment within that frame, but it still seems to be not a frame that allows a huge experimentation. And they're just games this small, this simple, that offer more ways to try to solve the puzzle of the game more than this game does. Even the first game in the series, the game about Arnhem, I just found to be more interesting because of a larger number of things that you could do around the restrictions of the map and of the system. Also, I'm a big fan of cheat pool games. If you watch my reviews, you know that I love the system. In this game, because of the way in which terrain works here and because of the low number of units that you have, sometimes that may have an impact on gameplay. There may be more than it is desirable. Usually, I like when cheat pool games bring in a certain degree of unpredictability and present you with new problems that you can work around. In this case, those problems you really cannot do much about them. If you are the LA player and the German player is stubborn and decides to defend the bridges, and the cycle of cheats allows him to bring in reinforcements before you can launch a close combat attack, there really isn't much that you can do. Your main choice is whether to launch large attacks that have a virtually automatic chance of inflicting a hit, or slightly higher number of smaller attacks with low chance of inflicting a hit. But again, the cycle of reinforcements that may be allowed to the German player may have such a huge role that sometimes you feel that what you're doing is not nearly as important as drawing the right cheat at the right moment, which in a certain way reduces the role of the player and the involvement of the player. This is my general impression. Overall, this is a game that is enjoyable for what it is, which is a very simple, very linear introduction to wargaming. It gives you a quick, clear picture of the overall action. If you have any didactic interest in showing this battle to anybody, of course, here you have a way of showing it that is better than any picture, better than any movie, because player can still try their hand at seeing, at making history happen. But overall, the game is not as engaging as the previous game in the series or as other introductory games. Still, I would recommend it as an introduction to wargaming, but not for many other purposes.